A new year. So before Christmas, I was saying Rishi Sunak sort of limped into Christmas, and then now we're in the new year, and another disaster.
Still limping. He limped out.
I don't think he's limping. He's now sort of being dragged around. And
just a flesh wound.
Very good. Very nice reference. It shows your age. So. I'm older than you are.
Oh, you're much older.
So this is all right. Thank you. This is Chris Skidmore. So Rishi Sunak has been going from by-election to by-election. I mean, it really is like hacking off one MP after another. And I kind of feel a bit sorry for him. He's trying desperately to hold the party together. Well, I'm just being nice. This is my New Year's spirit.
No one else in this room.
I know. But so this is Chris Skidmore, a former energy minister. He's now quit over Rishi Sunak's plans to boost oil and gas fields in the North Sea. So this is going to be a huge battle in the Commons next week. He says he is resigning the Tory whip. Out new oil and gas licences. Now, this means he's got another by-election. This is a majority of 11,220. To say it looks vulnerable is an understatement.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, this is so painful to watch at this point. He had 5 by-elections last year. He lost 4 of them dramatically, complete landslides, so embarrassing. 1-1 on a sort of technicality because of the ULEZ.
That's right, Uxbridge.
What we're seeing now is just awful to witness, and I think in many ways it could almost push for a sooner election, no matter what he said last week about it being later in the year. If it continues down this path of continuously chipping away, they could pull it closer. But I also...
Could they?
Well, I really wouldn't rule that. I mean, even the language that he used in that was so wishy-washy. It was so...
So he said, my working assumption,
yeah,
and that gave him this huge amount of manoeuvring.
Exactly. And I thought that was kind of a weak stance to be taking in many ways. There's little time now for him to put into place when it is, and he couldn't even give a more direct answer to that. And he said, you know, it's my working assumption. I think that's pretty weak as far as it goes. But the cynic in me for Chris Skidmore here thinks what he's done is very underhanded as well, because there is only a mere few months left until we'll have the general election, and he's done it at a time when he already knows he's going to be stepping down, and he knows that seat will no longer be there at the next general election. And so he's stepping down now. His seat's not going to be there. Anyone who comes in will only be there for a few months. And so I think it's very underhanded.
Jonathon, but is this basically him being stabbed in the front by one of his own MPs? It can't. I mean, Labour has a strong lead, although I still, we've talked about this before, I don't think it's quite as firm as people make out, but it's still miles ahead. But in terms of this, what does Rishi Sunak do from here? Does he just bite the bullet, go for an election? Does he hold out? Does he hope? Because out of those 5 pledges, he's only delivered one, and I'm not sure he delivered that anyway, which is inflation. But the fact is, he's only got 20% in his exam grades. Does he then hold out for as long as possible? What does he do?
No, he doesn't hold out as long as possible. That's the worst thing he could do. Just wait for the clock to go down so everyone knows that he's a loser. Exactly. And if you remember, after the 2010 election, the allegation of squatting in Downing Street,
which
was made against Gordon Brown, that was so poisonous and kind of like forced sort of Brown's hand, if you like, and sort of, you know, hastened the end of that sort of interregnum before the coalition came in. And so now Labour has got this quite clever attack line of squatting in Downing Street. I think that Sunak had to kind of declare his hand on May, because if you remember, again, going back to Gordon Brown never made a public statement either way on the 2007 election. There never was. But because he never spoke about it, and because he allowed kind of buzz to gather about it, when he then decided not to go, he was seen as everyone as bottling it, even though he never actually said anything. So Sunak has sort of given himself a little bit of political space by saying it's probably not going to be May. So if he decides to go for May, then he can't be accused of sort of bottling it.
So that's quite interesting, isn't it? That lots of people said it would be May, because if we have the local elections and they are absolutely catastrophic for the Conservative Party, then that will be incredibly difficult to row back from.
Yes, or could it be a really clever double bluff? So that he's making everybody prepare for later in the year, and then he suddenly, at the shortest notice, announces May.
Oh, sure, but but Labour's not going to be stupid enough to fall for that. Their election campaign is fully underway. I think it's just everyone's planning for an election that could be called at any moment. So I mean, he might look. The bottom line is, in a way, us having this conversation is quite helpful for Sunak, because we're talking about process rather than substance. We're talking about how we're sort of, we're giving him the power, because he obviously has that power of, when will the king decide to do this? When's our great leader going to exercise this power that he has? My working assumption is such a weird thing to say, but it's completely in your control. You can do it at any moment.
He's just called in to say he's grateful we're talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. So the bottom line is, he is completely screwed whatever happens. Okay, there is no way he comes back from this. We're talking about whether it's sort of going to be in 1990, is it going to be 1997, or is it going to be Canada 1993? I suspect not. So I don't think it's going to be a complete wipeout. So it's not going to be.
Can I just say on this whole, there's going to be a complete wipeout. I think one of the reasons that he's holding out till autumn is that something might happen. If we look at the 2017 election with Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, Theresa May was also 20 points ahead just before that election, and then she bottled it, and it got much closer. She didn't lose, but it's about getting closer. It's about it not being a landslide. And I'm not saying that I necessarily think that's going to happen here. I do expect there to be a Labour victory, but it's about shortening.
Do you think that is a firm lead? Because I just looked at the latest poll. This is electoral calculus. So Labour has dropped a bit, but still at 42%. Tory 25%. Reform UK at this one is 9%. Lib Dems 11%. Green 6%. Now, also, just in terms of Starmer, I said this morning, he's so dull. I want someone, I think Sunak's dull as well.
He's like King Charisma.
No, I agree. But, I mean, does the public, does the electorate want someone quite boring? Because Boris Johnson was not boring, but look what we ended up with. And here we are. So
Liz Truss said he wasn't boring either, and look what happened with her.
Well, you could argue that. But when we look at Starmer's speech, he set out Project Hope. He called for a decade of national renewal. He talked about the downtrodden UK. He talked about holding on to the flickering hope that things can only get better, which I thought was quite clever, actually, because obviously that then relates back to Tony Blair. Does that inspire you?
He hasn't got any money.
Well, he hasn't got any money, but has he got charisma? Has he got what it takes to be Prime Minister?
I think he is a very clever man. I think he will be Prime Minister, so he's going to have to now, in these next few months, show that he can be. Come forward with policies, stand by what he says, and take that forward. You're right, up to this point, we haven't seen that much from him, and I'm really hoping that he does sort of come out of his shell in this real run-up to the general election.
What's going to happen in Wellingborough? Because I think this is another interesting one. Peter Bone obviously has... there was a recall petition. We've now got, something like 20,000 majority. That's obviously going to be the next by-election. We don't know when. There's also, and I will say this, and there is a caveat on that, we're seeing an increase for Reform UK. Ben Habib is standing there. It's just quite interesting. I think a lot of people are sitting back and thinking, I just don't quite know where to vote or who to put my cross next to.
Look, I think that what I would say is that we're not seeing a massive number of direct switches from the Tories to Labour. What we are seeing is Conservative voters staying at home or maybe going to Reform. That might be a bigger threat. And, as you all know perfectly well, now Reform is definitely going to stand against all Conservatives. That is going to be very, very helpful for Labour.
Also, I throw back at you, the Red Wall, remember, is the heartland for Reform UK, because these are true Brexit voters who believe they've been failed in that. So, in fact, Richard Tice has made it very clear that that Reform will stand against every Labour MP as well.
Yes, but that's not going to be as important, because what you'll have, we know this, like in Hartlepool, for example, 2019, Labour clung on, and the great untold story of the 2019 election is that Labour actually did a lot better than it would have done thanks to Reform, because Reform were Brexit Party, because Brexit Party candidates soaked up a lot of Conservative votes that Labour was able to sneak through the middle. And so, Hartlepool 2019, then you had the by-election after the election when Reform wasn't anywhere, and then obviously Labour lost that seat. So I think it'll be a very, very strong showing additionally thanks to Reform, and Reform could deliver Labour another 24 seats.
So and that's one of the things, Doctor, that has come back saying, well, Reform UK is going to split the Conservative vote and allow Labour in, but perhaps
the Tories should stand aside for Reform, Perhaps that's what should happen.
Perhaps you're right. Or perhaps the Conservative Party should remember what it is to be conservative. That might be a good idea. And Rishi Sunak also, you know, I said he was dull, but I did think at least he had process and due process. There's another story this morning, which is that Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, had significant doubts about sending migrants to Rwanda. He said he was very unclear about that, the cost-benefit. He actually said he didn't want to take migrants out of hotels because it was much cheaper to be in hotels. And now, of course, he's pinning everything on Rwanda. As we know, we've had the second reading in the House of Commons. It will come back. When do they come back? They come back on Monday, after their lovely holiday. Is Rishi Sunak a man of principle?
On this particular issue, I couldn't tell you why he stuck all his guns on going to Rwanda. I think it was a terrible decision. I don't support the Rwanda bill at all. I don't think it's ever really going to get through. So I don't get why he's chosen this as his hill to die on.
Is it not just, again, self-preservation, that he actually saw that on the grassroots side of things, the membership Suella was massively popular. Therefore, I need to cling on to some of those policies in order to get some of her popularity.
And interestingly, number 10 told Sunak to consider the popularity of that policy with the base.
But wasn't Suella Braverman, before she got kicked out, wasn't she actually in the Conservative home poll the least popular cabinet minister, or one of the very least popular cabinet ministers? Listen, the great thing about her, well, from her perspective, is that she's a fantastic self-promoter, and she sort of carries this all around her, which is very much Emperor's New Clothes, when she kind of says, well, she's going to carry the party with her. It's like Boris Johnson at the tail end of his power, you know, when he sort of led the protesters through the lobbies in the Brexit Northern Ireland bill, and there were 6. There were 6 rebels. You know, Braverman doesn't have any base behind her. I'm not sure she has a particular base in the party either.